Huh. Ah! I think that did it. That was weird. That was a new one on me. I don't know what that was all about. Oh, no, it's hiccuping. Weird. We back? Come on. It is not showing up there. What's going on? Let's try refreshing. Sorry about this. Aha! There it goes. Okay, sorry about that. On one end, it's showing it there. On the other hand, yeah, I don't know what's going on. Maybe there's some broader DDoS attack occurring um, on like the Cloudflare servers. So sorry about that. Um, I'm pretty sure I know where it cut off. So I'm going to assume that I can just reread this one paragraph and we should be good. So yeah, sorry about that. Thanks, Derpy Shark, for your input. I appreciate seeing that somebody's able to connect. It took me multiple refreshes on YouTube to even see that the stream was happening again for the second time. The first time, I have no idea what happened the first time. Um, I may or may not have my previous problem licked. So when this started happening, I was like, oh, great. Anyway, right back at it. Like Cass herself, they wore the gauzy, translucent robes of academia, wound multiple times around the body and fastened with a line of silver pins. But they, of course, had the tall, slim frames of first and second waves, which made the wrap look shimmery and elegant, while on Cass it bunched and twisted uncomfortably. There were a few other academics in the group who gravitated toward Firidy and Vanault to do the usual pecking order dance. The tourists, a more colorful. My nasal passages rebelled. The tourists, a more colorful group, Scales and Feathers seemed to be in this year, bunched around the buffet, chattering happily and ignoring the view. That left Cass with nobody to talk to, which was a blessing. With no network, you couldn't even fake an urgent blip to get out of a dead-end conversation. The bubbling blue thing had a sour aftertaste, but at least it had some kick. Cass sipped, made a face, and stared down at the drome. It wasn't much to look at, an oval floor a few hundred meters across, surrounded by level after level of tiered seating. Time and neglect had stripped off the fabric and paint, leaving only the monocrete foundations, a brutalist sketch of an amphitheater in keeping with twisted, decaying skyline that stretched beyond it. Overhead, the sky was nearly black with endless clouds, which flickered with caged lightning but refused to actually rain. When Cass had pictured the famous Mecha fights of old Earth, she'd imagined, well, not this. Something grander than a box full of overstuffed tourists staring down at a wreck. Pretty good, yeah? Cass blinked and looked up. A young woman was standing beside her, looking down at the arena with shining eyes. She was paler than anyone from Sentinel, built like a third wave with a dusting of freckles, a pug nose, and flyaway brown hair. She wore a blue jumpsuit, half open, with a stained gray undershirt beneath. Cass guessed her for 20, although age was a tricky thing to figure between planets. I suppose. Taking a sip from her blue bubbling thing to cover her confusion, Cass considered how best to get rid of this person. If they'd been on a civilized planet, She'd have had a dozen options. Then again, on a civilized planet, she'd have been broadcasting mood signifiers and contact protocols that would have made it unforgivably rude to speak to her in the first place when she wanted to introvert. Things being what they were, she settled on a haughty indifference. If you like ruins. Not that drome, the girl said. She had an odd sing-song accent Cass had never heard before. The warbots! Ain't seen those before, I spec. Not in person, Cass admitted. She pinched to zoom in on one of them, and when that naturally failed to work, leaned forward with a sigh. The one on the left looks like a Dreadcarl Mark IV. DC-3B1, the girl corrected, but she sounded impressed. You know your warbots. A fan, yeah? Of a sort, Cass said. When the girl raised eyebrows, when the girl's raised eyebrows invited her to continue, she sighed and admitted, I'm a research historian. Old tech is my job. Really? Killer. The girl grinned. Two of her teeth were crooked, Cass noted absently. You spend all day poking old bots? I spend all day going to meetings and begging for grant money, Cass muttered. A little too honest there, probably the alcohol speaking. Poking old bots is more like a hobby. The girl gave a cheerful blink of incomprehension, then shrugged. Killer, she said, an apparently all-purpose adjective. She extended a hand, which it took Cass a moment to remember she was supposed to shake. Something she'd only seen in period dramas. G. Scholar Zicticus 3, Cass said, trying to figure out how long one was supposed to spend clasping the other's hand. Call me Cass. Cass, G said, trying out the sound. She disentangled their fingers and pointed down to the arena floor again. What do you think of the other one? Flash, yeah? Cass peered down into the arena again, bemused. In truth, Mecha were not her area of expertise, but the Dreadcarl was an Eighth Empire mainstay, manufactured by the million. Its basic shape, 10 meters tall, wide enough that it looked squat, with powerful arms and a crested helmet, was instantly recognizable. The other mecha, the one that was to be its opponent, looked like a hodgepodge, with one arm longer than the other and one leg painted a bright green that didn't match. She raised her eyebrows. It looks like scrap, she said. It ain't scrap, G said. You should see it move, like lightning. She gave her gap-toothed smile again. Quick and smart beats big and dumb every time, yeah? If you say so. Bet on it? The words came out a little too fast. 10,000 terci. Cass blinked. Between the alcohol and G's accent, she felt a few seconds behind the conversation. 10,000 sesterci? Done! G snapped, then looked overhead. Register that! Registered, said an artificial voice. A drone the size of Cass's fist hummed down to hover alongside them. 10,000 sesterci on the outcome of the next contest between Scholar Zicticus 3 and Pilot G0. House fee will be 10%. Wait just a fucking minute, Cass hissed. Her head was swimming. I didn't... About time to get started, G said. Wish me luck, yeah? She cocked her head. Or maybe not. Before Cass could get another word out, she was gone. "10,000 terci!" The number marched round and round through G's head, with all its wonderful round zeros. She ducked out of the off-worlder's box through one of the kitchen entrances, ignoring the alarmed shout of a waiter who dropped a tray of something green as they nearly collided. G snagged one of the little morsels out of the air and popped it in her mouth as she rounded the corner into a storeroom. Fresh fruit popped between her teeth, sweet as soda, tangy like orange gummies. It was almost worth breaking in here just for the food, and she wished she had time to stay and get proper drunk on the fancy alco. No one had raised an eyebrow at a scav snatching drinks. One man had even complimented her on her fashion sense. Off-worlders are dumb as Creed, ain't they? Always said it. In the back of the storeroom was a half-sized door, leading to a vertical tunnel for the use of porter-bots, long abandoned. G, incidentally, G is spelled Z-H-I, so it might be Zi, it might be Z. I'm going with G. Xi flipped it up, slid through, and closed it again. Her little override was still stuck against the lock, and she yanked it free, which should hopefully keep anyone from following. Then it was just a matter of shimmying down the vertical shaft, which she was just about the right size to do, back jammed against one side and knees and palms against the other.
10,000 terci!
It wouldn't be quite that, of course. The house would take its cut, and she'd tapped her credit to get Speedy up and running. Even after paying all that off, though, there would be a healthy chunk left. Enough to spend a few years without fighting, if she wanted. Or enough to roll into a real project, her chance to get away from the drome forever. All she had to do now was win.
Easy as sludge.
Her heart was already pounding, and she forced herself to concentrate on descending the shaft.
One thing at a time, yeah?
She felt a pang of conscience for Cass, the off-worlder, but only a small one. She'd seemed nice enough, and she'd looked almost as out of place as Xi at the party, all short and curvy among the other tall, spindly tourists.
And she knew something about boats.
Most off-worlders wouldn't know a dreadcarl from a forklift. Anyone who knew something about bots, in Xi's opinion, couldn't be too bad a person. Still, Cass could afford it.
Off-worlders are rich and comfy, ain't they?
Worst came to worst, she'd have to sell off one of those fancy robes they all wore, that were barely solid enough to hide all your bits. Not that I mind, yeah? Cass had bits worth ogling, under other circumstances.
One thing at a time.
Xi glanced down, pulled in her legs, and dropped the rest of the way, hitting the bottom of the shaft in a crouch.
First win the slagging match, yeah?
From here she was in her element, among the maze of corridors and tunnels that ran under the drome. Xi headed back to the arena floor at an easy run, crossing from service passage to drain pipe to elevator shaft, through doorways and up rusty ladders installed by generations of scavs. In no time she popped out onto the main steps leading up to the floor of the drome, where a small crowd of her own people had gathered. Most were just assorted scavs come to ogle the bots, kept back by a couple of house reps in dark, mirror-finished armor. Xi grinned at them, and they didn't stop her as she strolled past, out onto the floor. Speedy was waiting for her, his legs pulled up in front of him, his mismatched arms folded across his knees. Cass was right. He did look like scrap, but the off-worlder couldn't see the hours Xi and Solomon had put into the warbot. Speedy might be ugly, but his servos were fast, and his reflexes were tuned to Xi's.
Quick and smart beats big and dumb, yeah?
Speaking of big and dumb, Custis was waiting for her. The other pilot was huge for a Zero, towering over Xi, with a thickly muscled frame he hadn't gotten drinking soda and eating sludge. He'd been a scav once, but he'd worked for the house for at least a decade.
Hi, Xi.
Hi yourself,
Xi said, trying for nonchalance.
Ain't you got checks to be running?
Tex'll do 'em,
Custis said, with a broad grin. He'd lost most of his teeth as a scav, and had since had them replaced with polished chrome. His smile gleamed.
Wanted to have a word, yeah?
So have it,
Xi said.
We ain't all got other people doing our work for us.
You could, though, Custis said. Nass would take you for the house in a hot second.
I slagging bet he would, Xi said, 'cause he knows I'm 10 times better than you, yeah?
Custis's cheek twitched, but he maintained his smile.
Everyone knows you're on the edge. No more credit. How many times have you patched this piece of junk back together?
He slammed a hand against Speedy's leg, dislodged a patch of rust, and laughed.
After this, you won't have a choice.
After I tear your bot to pieces, maybe Nas can beg me to take your job.
Xi,
Custis's lips curled back further.
you're going to be working for the house one way or the other. You need to decide how hard you want that to be, yeah?
That all you got to say?
For now.
He rapped Speedy's leg with his knuckles.
We'll see you smiling after.
Slag off then.
Custis sauntered away, deliberately taking his time. G made an obscene gesture after him and turned back to Speedy. Solomon had emerged from between the bot-bot's legs, blinking owlishly behind two large spectacles. The mechanic was a year or two younger than G, with the slightly wasted frame of most scavs. He wore a stained coverall too large for his meager body, with extra fabric tied off at the wrists and ankles. One sec. Something caught in my throat. He didn't touch anything, did he? Solomon said, glaring after Custis. Did you see if he touched anything?
He just banged on the armour a little, G said. Custis ain't got the brains for sabotage, yeah? Anyway, listen, I got the bet.
You got it? Solomon blinked again.
Signed and sealed. One of the idiot off-worlders put 10,000 on us.
Who's cut is 10%. Solomon muttered to himself. We owe Mary the Jacksakin another 1,500. Jast'll take 300, maybe.
It's enough, G said. More than enough. This time next week we could have everything we need, yeah?
There's still a lot of work to do, Solomon said. He pushed his spectacles up his nose, where they immediately slid back down. If Mary even has the parts.
The point is, G said, I was right, yeah? Worth the risk.
If you win.
Spady can run rings around some slagging dread Carl with all the tweaks you made.
I'm still worried about the joints. Solomon frowned. At full speed, we'll be pushing them past the ratings.
Spady won't let me down.
G rapped the patchwork bot affectionately.
You got him all tuned?
More or less. Solomon straightened up, tugging his fingers through his ragged mop of curly hair. Please be careful, G.
Always am, yeah?
G wrapped the embarrassed mechanic in a brief hug.
Come back safe and sound like always. You worry too much.
No such thing, Solomon said as she pulled away. He gave a weak wave as G ran around the back of the warbot, scrambled up the ladder there, and slid over Speedy's shoulder and down into the waiting cockpit in his chest cavity. It was cramped, barely big enough for her to spread her arms, with a gimbaled seat facing a dozen small screens. G slid into the chair and strapped herself in with the ease of long practice, the worn, tape-patched cushions molded to her shape. Her left hand slapped switches, closing the cockpit with a hiss and bringing the screens to life with views of the outside. 3 of them flickered, and one remained entirely dark until she gave it a good kick, and it reluctantly cleared. Speedy's control leads, a pair of long wires ending in sticky gel, went onto the jacks behind G's ears. Most scavs didn't even have jacks, but you couldn't pilot without them, and G had spent a year in debt to get hers installed. They were simple input-output, no internal processing, nothing for the omnipresent malware to attack. Speedy's OS bloomed in her vision, his status board blooming in her peripheral vision. Some green, mostly yellow, nothing crimson, with his artificial muscles clenching and humming as she ran through her checks. An external feed rang in her ears, the house flack running the game for the benefit of the tourists.
Pilots, are you ready to begin? Bet your ass,
Custis said, his amplified voice ringing through the dome. G glanced at Solomon, visible in one of the screens, working on an external display. He gave it a few more taps, then shot her a thumbs up and backed away.
Ready,
G said, and heard it echo through the external feed. The match will continue until one mecha is disabled or the pilot surrenders, the House Flak said. Deliberate killing blows are not permitted. Begin! Speedy surged to his feet with a whine. He was tall and ungainly compared to the squat, purposeful Dread Carl, and his mismatched arms gave him a half-finished look, but G knew it was an illusion.
Solomon worked his ass off tuning him up. Tuning him up.
There we go. Jesus.
Solomon worked his ass off tuning him up.
When the warbot moved forward, it was with a smooth, even gait, a trot that gradually built into a run. Across the floor of the drome, Custis's Dread Carl shook itself out. It was painted a flaking black with red accents, the impression of stoutness enhanced by the thick armor plating bolted across its joints and torso. It carried an oval shield in one hand, rimmed with spikes, and a brutal-looking axe in the other. Custis turned in place, shield raised, as G sprinted toward him.
Knows he can't keep up with me.
G grinned savagely.
Ain't gonna save him.
Speedy's weapons were a pair of long knives strapped to his back, each blade longer than a human was tall. They were as strong and sharp as Solomon could make them, but G didn't fool herself that she could punch through the Dread Carl's armor.
Go for the gaps. Wear him down, yeah?
She threw herself forward. Custis held his ground, meeting her charge with his shield, his axe swinging in from her right. G saw that coming kilometers away, already turning. Speedy slammed into the shield with one shoulder, a glancing blow that sent the warbot into a spin, and rocked Custis back on his heels. Before he could readjust, G dug in her back heel, metal screaming as it dug into monocrete, and lunged low and fast. One knife came out, slashing at the back of the Dread Carl's knee. The screech of contact was audible even through the cockpit walls, and sparks sprayed like an incandescent fountain. Then she was past, the Dread Carl clumsily turning in her wake, axe swinging a wild, pointless arc.
Yes!
G bounced in her seat as Speedy got clear, turned in a neat arc, and came round again.
Yes, yes, yes! I can do this! I can take him! 10,000 terci!
Custis half turned, expecting her to try the same approach again. Instead, she zagged right, ducking under the axe's arc, her knife slashing against the Dread Carl's elbow. Armor screamed and broke with an almighty crunch, sending half a plate spinning away to crash against the arena wall. G pivoted on one foot again, delivering another blow to the Dread Carl's rear that sent the heavier machine staggering forward. Another pass, and another, and another. Speedy's cockpit was growing warm, and drops of water from G's hot breath condensed on the monitors.
Slagging break, you piece of scrap!
The Dread Carl was tougher than she'd bargained for. A half-dozen hits had mangled the armor around its joints and left bright scars on the metal beneath, but all she'd gotten for her pains was a slight limp on the left side. Custis's axe had yet to connect, but more of the status indicators in the corner of G's eye were slipping from green to yellow.
Fucking slag heap!
"Sol," she called over a private link,
I need more power!
"But idea," Solomon sent back, his voice scratchy with static. "I told you, the joints."
Just take me through it, yeah?
Sorry,
Just talk me through it, yeah?
Reluctantly, he muttered a few command strings. G repeated them through her jacks, watching her screens. Custis seemed confused by her pause, the Dread Carl shifting uncertainly. Finally, it lumbered into a slow jog, coming at her shield first. "Limiters released," the system told her. She pushed off, and Speedy flew, meters between each enormous bounding leap. G gave a high, delighted laugh, closing the distance with the Dread Carl, ducking to get under the rim of its shield. Her knife slammed into the other bot's knee with all the momentum of her run behind it, and this time the armor tore away entirely, the joint half shattering under the impact. Custis staggered, and Xi planted her feet, skidding to a halt in a spray of sparks.
One more hit!
Warnings jangled in her ear, and part of the status display flashed red. Through her jacks, Xi felt Speedy's ankle shatter, a nearly physical impact that lit up her leg with sympathetic pain. Her slide turned into a fall, the lanky warbot coming down heavily on his face, leaving her hanging against the straps. One of her leads came loose, her feed from the bot suddenly flickery and intermittent, and she groped for it desperately with one hand while trying to get Speedy to roll over. She managed both, eventually, pressing the lead back into place as the bot heaved himself onto one side. Half her screens were dark, but the other half showed the Dreadcarl coming, one leg dragging behind it, axe still in hand.
Almost got him down!
Xi's teeth were clenched, her hair matted with sweat.
One more hit!
Speedy's right ankle was gone, and his left was damaged. She probably couldn't stand up, but she could get to her knees.
Come a little bit closer.
The Dreadcarl lurched forward, axe rising. Xi pounced, coming up to her knees, knives in both hands now. She swung for Custis's bad leg and missed. The Dreadcarl shifted to one side, not nearly as badly damaged as it had seemed moments earlier.
He's slagging baited me.
The axe came down on Speedy's shoulder, and Xi screamed. The pain wasn't real, not exactly, just an artifact of the link, but it felt real for just a moment. Metal screeched and tore, and a second blow severed Speedy's arm entirely, tons of metal crashing to the arena floor. Energy popped and crackled at the joint, and fluids sprayed. Custis lashed out with his shield, catching Speedy in the chest and driving him onto his back. Xi slamming into her battered seat with tooth-crack force. She went for him with her remaining arm, weakly, but he slammed a foot down on Speedy's wrist.
Surrender!
Custis's voice crackled over the link.
Go fuck yourself, slag!
Xi tasted blood in her mouth.
Lip-dicked coward slag fucker!
The Dreadcarl raised its axe, reversing it, the butt equipped with a nasty spike. Custis brought this down, straight at Speedy's chest, straight at her, and Xi screamed. Sparks exploded through the cockpit, screens going to snow. A second blow from the Dreadcarl's brutally strong arms tore the whole front piece away, leaving her staring up at the huge machine without the benefit of cameras, watching helpless as the axe rose and came down again, and halted a few meters above her. Custis's voice crackled in her ear.
You're finished, Xi.
She could hear his elation.
The house owns you now.
Arguing with a bot wasn't easy at the best of times, and being suddenly aware of just how drunk you actually were didn't make it any easier. Cass stared at the little hovering thing with a strong desire to smash it to the ground with a drinks tray and grind it underfoot. Unfortunately, she suspected this would only make things worse. She tried again.
I don't have 10,000 sesterces.
The bot buzzed contemplatively.
You are here under the auspices of the Sentinel Scholarium and have been authorized to access its credit line. To access its credit line. We have determined that credit to be adequate.
Fuck me with a neutronium strap-on,
Cass thought, and narrowly managed not to say it aloud. Ending up in hock to some old Earth gambling den would be bad enough. If she lost the Scholarium 10,000 sesterces, she might as well throw herself out the airlock on the way home. Fired wouldn't even begin to cover it. The arch-scholar would have her banned from every responsible profession, and she'd spend the next 2 decades in mandatory re-education.
But I didn't even agree to the fucking bet, she said.
Analysis of your vocal pattern indicated consent.
the bot said smugly. Details of wagering procedure were sent to you as part of your customer agreement. Cass closed her eyes, pulse pounding in her temples. Of course, extensive, unreadable, blink to agree contracts were still considered binding here on old Earth, junk heap of the empires. A good inter-system lawyer might get her out of it, but she couldn't afford one, and had no way to recruit any sort of help anyway without tipping off Faraday and the rest of the scholars. Fuck, fuck, fuck! The match is beginning, scholar, the bot said. Good fortune to you. Under other circumstances, watching hundreds of tons of 10-meter robots smashing into one another at high speed might have been, if not Kaz's preferred entertainment, at least exciting. As it was, she could only stare through the war glass with a sense of mounting despair. The dread Carl, so formidable looking, was outmaneuvered from the beginning by the patchwork mecha G had called Speedy. Cass had to admit the girl's claims about her bot were at least close to accurate. It moved with a smooth synchronicity, while the dread Carl shifted awkwardly, like a badly programmed toy. I wonder what the code looks like. The majority of Speedy's parts seemed to be late period, 8th Empire at the earliest, but the mecha's movement implied considerably more sophisticated processing than that era had allowed. I wouldn't be surprised if that's a 6th Empire core, but getting it hooked up without a gateway layer introducing extra latency. She slammed her head, not too gently, against the glass. Does it really fucking matter right now? Speedy's knives scored against the heavier bot's vulnerable joints, again and again, and with each hit Kaz's stomach sank. Forget the projects she'd hoped to pursue here on Earth. Her chance of ever seeing another piece of ancient code was rapidly going down the fact tube. She glared at the dread Carl, willing its pilot to do better. Come on, come on, come on! Speedy went under the other bot's shield, slashed at the back of its knee, and skidded to a perfect halt, ready for another blow, and one of its ankles blew out with a crash and a shower of sparks, sending the patchwork bot to the monocrete. Yes! Cass slammed her hands against the glass. Oh, sacred throne! She'd never been a religious person. It was terribly unfashionable on Sentinel and smacked of third-wave superstition, but she swore to herself then and there she would offer a sacrifice to the throne every day for a year if Xi contrived to lose. Sorry. Come on, you sneaky little girl, you can't get out of this, can you? Surrender already! The dread Carl dodged a last blow and brought its axe down, severing Speedy's arm at the shoulder. The heavy warbot forced its opponent on its back and flipped the axe around, slamming the spiked butt into Speedy's cockpit. Surrender! Cass urged. The scene in front of her felt strangely silent, isolated. Any similar event back on Sentinel would be plastered over with commentary and emoji from the spectators. Cass blinked as the dread Carl raised its axe again. He won't actually. I mean, not even on old Earth. The blow fell, ripping the whole front panel off of Speedy. Cass swore aloud. Fucking throne! The match is decided, the officiant declared. Pilot Custis Zero is the winner.
Right.
Cass let out a breath. Old Earth might be a mess, but it wasn't savage. This wasn't an 8th Empire blood sport.
She will be all right. Her hands slipped off the glass, and that little fucker owes me 10,000 sesterces.
Congratulations, Scholar Zicticus 3, the bot said at her elbow.
Fucking throne, Cass repeated quietly and took a deep breath. So do you just put the money in my account?
Funds will be transferred to you once they are received from Pilot G0, the bot said. Her credit instrument is routed via an out-system bank, so settlement may take some time.
Of course, Cass muttered to herself.
In the meantime, the house cut of 1,000 sesterces will be deducted from the credit of the Sentinel Scholarium. The bot burbled happily. Thank you for gaming with us.
Wait,
The little thing tried to hover away, but Cass grabbed it with both hands.
Wait a minute. What did you say?
Please release this unit or security will be notified.
Just repeat what you told me, please.
It buzzed through her fingers, irritated.
The house cut of 1,000 sesterces will be deducted from...
I won the bet, didn't I?
Correct. Pilot G0 owes you 10,000 sesterces. You owe the house a 1,000 sesterces fee. Since your account is not currently adequate, your organization's credit will be...
And how long will it take to get the money from G?
Unknown. Her credit is with the First Bank of Rigel Prime, and communication lag...
Cass's jaw fell open. She blinked at the bot, which was still going on about long-distance fees.
Rigel Prime, Cass interrupted through gritted teeth, was blown into gravel by Emperor Reaps a Dark Harvest. Her voice dropped to a hiss. 4,000 years ago.
Communications may pose some difficulty, the bot said blithely, but the cryptographic signature and proof of transmission on the credit instrument...
She fucking faked it.
Of course she had. She hadn't looked like she had 10,000 sesterces to spare, either.
Oh, fucking throne.
Losing 1,000 sesterces of the Scholarium's money might be better than losing 10,000, but only in the same sense that being thrown in a furnace is better than being thrown into the sun.
All right, Cass said very slowly. I would like to cancel the bet. I can do that, can't I, since I won it? I don't need her money. We can call the whole thing off.
She waited, heart in her throat, while the bot whirred and clicked to itself. Finally, with great reluctance, it said,
House rules state that wagers can be cancelled.
Then do it!
With the explicit agreement of both parties.
She lost the bet! Cass exploded. Of course she'll want to cancel it.
House rules state...
Cass hurled the little thing against the war-glass window as hard as she could, and took off running.
Gee!
Solomon's voice breaking through the fog of pain.
Gee, are you all right?
All right did not, in any way, describe how G felt. But she forced her eyes open and ripped the leads from her jacks, letting poor Speedy's blaring red status display and clanging alarms vanish. That left her lying on her wrecked chair, staring up through where the front of the cockpit had been... Oh, sorry. That left her lying on her wrecked chair, staring up through where the front of her cockpit had been at the gray, flickering sky. She popped the restraints and unbuckled herself, groaning, and tested her limbs.
Nothing broken?
Except slagging everything, obviously. Any hopes she had for the rest of her life were in pieces along with her warbot.
We were so slagging close.
She! Solomon's bespectacled face appeared over the side of the broken cockpit.
I ain't dead, she said. Just a little bruised, yeah? You have to move, Solomon said. Custis wasn't kidding. There are house guards coming. House slagging corpse rats.
G scrambled to her feet, standing on the now horizontal chair. From there she could reach one of the torn struts. The sharp edges dug into her hands, but she levered herself up until she could hook her legs over the edge of the huge wound in Speedy's skin, and from there a bit of acrobatic contortion got her standing on his stomach beside Solomon. The dread Carl was nearby, struggling to kneel with one damaged leg.
I'll manage that much, yeah?
As she watched, it finally settled down, and the cockpit opened. Custis scrambled out, descending the ladder in his mecha's back. More worrying, the House Flak was heading their way from across the arena, with a couple of armed and armored guards in tow.
Come on, Ji said. She jumped off the mech to the monocrete, absorbing the fall with a crouch, then turned around and caught Solomon when he jumped after her. The nearest edge of the arena was only a couple of dozen meters away, and she knew the area well. There was a service elevator that still worked. Best bet, yeah? She winced at the thought of wagers. So slagging close.
Jay!
Custis, a little wobbly on his feet, but improving with every stride, started across the crete toward her.
Just stay put, would ya? Don't make this harder than it has to be.
Slag off with a blender! Ji shouted back at him. Which I should really add into my lexicon of epithets. She tugged Solomon to follow her, but he pulled free of her grip and shook his head. I'll slow them down as much as I can, he said. I'll be fine, they don't care about me. When she hesitated, he gave her a push. Go, Ji, unless you want to spend the rest of your life as a slave of the house. Slag and slime. Ji looked at the rapidly approaching troopers, ducked her head, and started running.
Oi!
Custis shouted.
Throne curse it, G! Let go of me!
He'd started running as well, but Solomon had intercepted him, the diminutive mechanic grabbing hold of the burly pilot's leg like blast tick. Oh, it's missing A. Sorry. Grabbing hold of the burly pilot's leg like a blast tick and refusing to let go. Custis cuffed him across the head, but he only held on tighter.
Don't be a fool!
Better a fool than a slave, yeah? The troopers were closing, but she had enough of a lead to reach the service door. They won't shoot yet. They want me as a nice and quiet pilot for their fights, not a slagged corpse. Still, her back itched as she bolted for the service tunnel. One last look back showed her Custis finally prying Solomon loose and joining the troopers in pursuit. Ji put her head down and ran, completely missing the figure in a diaphanous gray robe trying to flag her down. Descending from the glassed-in balcony to the arena floor turned out to be a matter of simply following every stairway and ladder that led down, while trying desperately to keep from becoming disoriented. Fortunately, Cass had always had a good sense of direction, unlike the first and second waves who needed algo assistance to find their way to the toilet. She pushed through a set of swinging doors, leaving the furnished and carpeted section of the dome, and pounded down a bare monocrete tunnel. Every part of her mind that wasn't rigid with terror or drowned in alcohol was screaming at her that this was a bad idea. Old Earth might not be savage, but it was indisputably unpleasant, and she could all too easily imagine what nasty things could happen to an off-worlder who wandered away from her tour group. But if there was any chance of getting out from under whatever insanity Ji had caught her in, she had to catch up with the girl before she disappeared. And since she apparently scammed the authorities with a bogus credit doc, I'm guessing she's going to try to disappear pretty fucking quick. A twisting stairway took her down to what she guessed was ground level, ending in a broad monocrete tunnel with a high, curved roof, big enough for a warbot to walk down. It hadn't been used for that purpose in some time, though, and it was crowded with debris, chunks of broken crete, rusting wrecks of small machines, accumulations of scrap metal and plastic trash with shredded, colorful labels. To Cass's left, it continued on into darkness, while to her right it led onto the drome floor. She was close. She could see the kneeling shape of the Dreadcarl and the sprawled, twisted figure of Ji's Mecha. Ji herself was on the ground, hurrying closer. Cass could see the Dreadcarl's pilot, a big man, apparently fighting a younger boy and shouting something. Ji ignored him, sprinting now, dodging through the rubble. Cass stood up and waved. Ji! She said, but apparently not loud enough because the girl just kept running. With a muttered oath, Cass started after her, cursing her scholar's robe. It was meant for sitting in a library immersed in ancient archives, not chasing through ruins. Ji, wait! Ji did not wait. The tunnel grew darker the further they came from the entrance, and the girl was visible as little more than an agile shadow. Cass barked her shin on a torn block of monocrete, swore again, and raised her voice. She, I'm not here to collect, throne, damn it! I just want... Would you wait? She hurried onward, limping slightly. Ji was out of sight now, the rubble just darker patches in the gloom. Cass's heart sank further. A little ways further on, the ground underfoot turned from monocrete to metal, her boots clanking with every step. She paused for a moment, listening, but heard no other footfalls. She's gone. Cass stopped beside a rusted-out metal crate and fought for breath. Sacred fucking throne. She felt more like an idiot than ever. I should have known better than to chase after her. This was Ji's home, and if she didn't want to be found, presumably she had ways to vanish. Which leaves me completely and utterly fucked. Cass leaned against the crate and sighed. Maybe I should just go throw myself on Firides' mercy. She'd always gotten along all right with the old scholar. At least he smiles at me at parties, even if he can't be bothered to say hello. If she offered to pay back the 1,000 sesterci, maybe Firides could be persuaded to keep the fact that she'd lost university funds from the arch-scholar. Not fucking likely. If she'd been a first wave like Gneisen, of ancient pedigree, no doubt even the arch-scholar would have bent every rule in the book and laughed everything off as youthful indiscretion. But Cass had fought all her life to reach even her modest position, and she was acutely aware that any third wave who tripped up even slightly would find a dozen others just behind her, ready to pull her down and take her place. Why would Firides or the arch-scholar put themselves out helping someone they can easily replace? Fuck! She sank to her knees, rusted metal scratchy against her back, and fought against the sobs that threatened suddenly to overwhelm her. Fuck! 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 Bright lights snapped on with a clank, turning the tunnel into a sharp-edged hash of shadows. Blinking, Cass wiped at her eyes and made out 3 figures standing in the tunnel, back the way they'd come. 2 wore red-painted armor and faceless visors, with the lights fixed to their shoulder plates. The third was the big, broad-shouldered man who'd piloted the Dreadcarl. The armored figures, Cass noticed abruptly, carried squat, ugly-looking rifles. She knew the shape from vids and sims, but she'd never seen one in person. From where they were looking, she guessed they couldn't see her, sitting amongst the debris. She thought about standing up and identifying herself, but the sight of the guns gave her pause. But they have to be with the authorities, don't they?
Jay, the pilot said, I know you're here. We don't want to hurt you.
Of course. No doubt what passed for the law here would be just as interested in tracking down the fleeing fraudster as Cass was. Maybe they can help me. She gathered herself to her feet.
But we will, the big man went on, if we have to.
One of the armored figures brought rifle to shoulder and fired a burst, aiming high. The strobing flash was bright even against the spotlight, and the sound was shattering in the enclosed space, a cacophonous roar punctuated by cracks and pings as the bullets hit and ricocheted. Cass doubled over, hands pressed to her ears. The thought of white-hot metal zipping around, moving so fast that it wouldn't even notice if it happened to encounter a slightly pudgy third-wave scholar, only reduce her insides to the consistency of ground meat and move happily on. She wanted to scream, and didn't dare. The firing cut off, leaving her ears ringing with echoes. The pilot raised his voice.
Come on, Jay, don't make me get rough.
There was an extended screech of metal on metal as something ancient and rusty inexorably shifted. The ground under Cass's feet shivered, then gave a tiny lurch, enough to throw her off balance. Then it dropped out from under her, throwing her against the rusted crate and sending her stomach into her throat. The spotlights vanished abruptly, and she was falling through absolute darkness.
It felt like an eternity before Cass got a hold of herself, but it could only have been a few seconds. The falling sensation vanished, and her feet were once again firmly planted on the metal floor. But they were still moving. Blurred lights appearing and vanishing around her, the ground vibrating with a steady buzz. She was on an elevator platform, she realized, a big one, moving downward. Which made sense, the scholar part of her mind reported. If the tunnel had been for moving warbots to the arena floor, there had to be some way of getting the warbots into the tunnel. From the speed they seemed to be moving, they were going a long way down. On a civilized planet, with a network and a locator grid, she could have immediately called up a map and figured out how far she'd come and where she was likely to end up. Here, all she could do was grit her teeth and wait. After another few seconds, the platform slowed, the hard acceleration less surprising but still unpleasant. It coasted to an abrupt stop with a clank, and the vibrations ceased, leaving Cass trembling herself in sympathy. Sorry. At first she could see nothing, but soon a faint glow appeared overhead, strengthening gradually to a weak twilight. It came from a meandering strip painted on the ceiling, which was the same vaulted monocrete as the tunnel above, and revealed a similar stretch of empty corridor, pocked with small craters, floor littered with fragments. Someone shifted. Cass froze and watched as Xi got up from behind a broken-down lifter bot. The girl was visible only in silhouette, but she moved slowly, with a feeling of utter exhaustion. She picked her way through the debris on the elevator and then headed off down the tunnel. For a long second, Cass hesitated. It was possible she could find the controls for the elevator. Everything on Earth had to have a manual control, didn't it? If it wasn't locked, she might be able to get back up. Right back to a bunch of armored gunmen who seemed to want to shoot first and ask questions later. On the other hand, if she stayed put, Xi would quickly be out of sight, and then her only option would be to become hopelessly lost, starve, and die. On the third hand, which Cass had occasionally contemplated having installed, she was no longer eager to confront Xi herself. If people were actually shooting at each other, she was so far out of her depth she could no longer see the surface. Better to take her chances with the arch-scholar. Considering all of this, Cass pushed herself to her feet, finding her legs rubbery and uncooperative. Xi was still visible, but far enough ahead that she probably wouldn't notice Cass unless she looked backward, and she didn't seem inclined to do that. Cass followed her at a careful pace, keeping a generous distance between them, enough to run for it if it came to that. Xi made a few turns down apparently identical side tunnels, enough to confirm Cass's assumption that she would be hopelessly lost if she struck out on her own. Eventually, she came to a large doorway, warbot-sized like the tunnel itself. There was some kind of terminal on one side, and Xi went to it, while Cass flattened herself against the wall and waited. After a moment, the doors slid open from the center, grinding and groaning, and Xi slipped through as soon as they were wide enough to admit her. Cass gave it a little longer, while the door continued to open, then followed. Beyond was a big, mostly empty room, the walls raw monocrete, a few brighter lights on stands supplementing the gray glow from the ceiling strip. Machinery of various sorts was arranged around the periphery, but Cass gave it only a cursory look, because in the center of the room it was a warbot. But it bore the same resemblance to the Dreadcarl that a monomolecular edged ceramic thermocutter did to a crude stone axe or prehistoric steel bayonet. Steel. Wow. Okay, let's try that again. Wow. It was a warbot, but it bore the same resemblance to the Dreadcarl that a monomolecular edged ceramic thermocutter did to a crude stone axe or prehistoric steel bayonet. Where the Dreadcarl had been all blocky brushed metal painted with red stripes, this machine was smooth, organic looking, sleek, and black. The surrounding lights reflected off its curved surfaces in smeared streaks.
It knelt on one knee, arms crossed, as though in the act of taking an oath. Its head, slightly bent, was a featureless black oval. That's old. Cass's mind was buzzing, cross-referencing and gathering evidence, barely leaving room for conscious thought. Third Empire, maybe. The legendary height of mankind's technological prowess before the fracture, the wars, and the long slide downward. It's beautiful. She had never seen anything remotely like it in 20 years of study. Barely aware of what she was doing, Cass moved into the room, walking with the same reverent silence she would have in oh, sorry, walking with the same reverent silence she would have in an sorry. Sorry, something caught in my throat again. I don't know what's going on. Where were we? Walking with the barely aware of what she was doing, Cass moved into the room, walking with the same reverent silence she would have in an ancient marble-floored library. She stood in front of the bot and saw her own face reflected in its sleek black armor, distorted like in a funhouse mirror. Reaching out to touch it, she realized she was holding her breath. Her fingers slid dreamily over a nearly frictionless surface, as though it was slick with grease. It looks intact. The number of still functional Third Empire relics could be counted on the fingers of one hand, even if you'd had an unfortunate encounter with a berserk auto chef. The most famous was the battleship Mega Chiron, which, even crippled, made the Volstrian fleet an unmatched power amongst the worlds. And that was why there were so few relics left. They were so effective that they got used over and over until they finally gave out. What time could not accomplish, the weapons of man did. If it was Third Empire, the Warbot was well over 3,000 years old. I need to see inside. Processors were more likely to have degraded than armor, but if there was anything left, it would be the find of a lifetime. The scraps of archaeocode in this machine could be the basis of the rest of her career. The cockpit was open, she saw, a hatch on the bot's back, not into the chest like the Dreadcarl. Moving as if in a dream, Cass found a rickety metal gantry that ran along one wall at the right height to give access. She climbed up a set of creaking stairs and hurried around to it. The hatch, breaking the smooth lines of the warbot's outer skin, looked almost offensive, but Cass was just glad to see that the inner mechanisms looked reasonably intact. She reached the edge and looked down. There was a chair, molded into the back wall, but otherwise the cockpit was just a coffin-sized space, as black and featureless as the rest of the bot. Curled up in the chair, arms wrapped around her knees, face buried, was she. Oh! Cass let out a breath, suddenly remembering how she'd gotten here. Hi. Xi looked around, her eyes red and her face streaked with tears. At the sight of Cass, she unfolded, shockingly fast, hoisting herself out of the warbot's cockpit and onto the gantry. Cass fell backward, scrambling away on hands and knees, but Xi was on her immediately. Wait a minute, if she scrambled backward, how did she scramble away on hands and knees? Maybe she rolled over. Sorry. Maybe she has reverse joint knees. I don't know. They've already talked about body modification being de rigueur. Sorry, where were we? Right. One of the pilot's hands pressed her shoulder against the metal, while the other snatched a long-bladed knife from a sheath on her back. Cass struggled to focus on the gleaming weapon as Xi held it poised between them. "What?" the pilot grated. "Are you slagging doing here, yeah?" Xi had hoped that Custis and his thugs would conclude she'd escaped another way and give up. When the guard had started shooting, though, she'd instinctively slapped the elevator button, which in retrospect was probably the kind of reaction they'd been hoping for. The cargo platform had gotten her clear, but now that they knew it still functioned, the house would have it watched, which meant one fewer way out. Not that it mattered. Not that anything matters. She'd staggered the few hundred meters to Alpha Zero's hangar in a daze. The ancient warbot was waiting for her, as always, looking so gleaming and perfect. And he'd been so close to actually being perfect, too. A few more parts, some software work, and finished. It's all finished. She clambered into the thing's cockpit and curled up in the gel-surfaced chair. The smells of the old bot, ancient dust, and the ozone tang of her own metalwork were comforting. She had her own quarters, a hidey hole down in one of the side corridors with a sleeping mat and a few personals, but after all the hours she'd spent here, the warbot now felt more like home than anywhere else. And before long, that'll be gone too. Because there was only one choice left, really. She owed the house now for the bet with Cass. She owed the scrap dealers for the parts she'd used for Speedy. She owed for food and water on credit, owed Solomon for his work, owed and owed and owed. The only way to pay any of it back was to strip Alpha Zero for parts, sell his ancient muscles and armor and processors off piecemeal. To take the bot she'd spent what felt like half her life restoring and tear it to pieces and get only a tiny fraction of its true value. Maybe enough to square everyone, to leave her with nothing. Then I can be a slave of the house, all sweet and helpful like Costis would want. And never, ever leave, never see space, never, 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 never. G so G G G choked back a sob. I won't do it. Better that Alpha Zero stay here, down in the dark and dust, than he get torn to shreds for a quick credit. Maybe someday somebody'll find him who understands, yeah? Which left nothing for G herself but she didn't know. Slag me. Her sleeve was wet through the tears. Sorry, her sleeve was wet through with tears. Better. Above her there was a sound, a footstep on the metal gantry. G looked up and got a blurry glimpse of a figure bending over her. They slaggin' found me! She grabbed for her knife, terror warring in her heart with a kind of fierce exhilaration. Surging upward, she knocked her attacker down and straddled her. Can go down fightin', yeah? And take a few of them with me! She blinked the tears from her eyes and focused. It wasn't Custis or any of his house thugs underneath her, but someone considerably smaller and softer, dressed in a gray robe. Her eyes were very wide, and her breath came in quick gasps. She was terrified, G realized. What are you slaggin' doin' here, yeah? She shook her head, fading adrenaline making her feel slow and heavy. Please, Cass said very quietly, please don't kill me. I'm not. G realized she was still holding her knife with the point to Cass's throat. She hurriedly returned it to its sheath. Slag it. Sorry, I thought you were someone else, yeah? Okay. Cass swallowed, her breathing slowing a little. If you're not going to kill me, do you think you could get off? Sure, G muttered, shifting backward. Cass extracted herself and shuffled into a crouch, backing away a few steps. But how did you get here? I followed you, Cass said. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. She cocked her head. Well, I guess I meant to at first, but then I got stuck and I didn't want to get lost. I ain't following, G said, scratching the back of her head. Maybe slow down a bit, yeah? Sorry, Cass said again. When that guard started shooting, I kind of panicked. You were there? She said. I tried to wave to you, Cass said. I was a little busy, yeah? I understand that now, Cass said. "I came down to talk to you about the bet, and I saw you run past. I followed you onto the elevator, and when that pilot—" "Custis," G muttered. "When Custis showed up, I hunkered down, and then the elevator turned on, and when we got to the bottom, I figured I had better keep up with you, or I would never find my way out." Cass swallowed, some of the color returning to her face. "I wasn't expecting this. I'll bet you weren't. Or rather, I'll bet you weren't." That's in italics, so it's a thought, so it doesn't matter anyway. She looked at the off-worlder. She looked the off-worlder over, assessing. She didn't look quite as off-worlder-y down here, away from her fancy friends, with her robe mussed and her hair damp with sweat. "Doesn't look half bad, actually," a slightly inappropriate part of G's mind supplied. Her body had been soft under G's hips. "Not the time, yeah?" Her eyes narrowed. "What am I supposed to slag and do with her?" "You're wondering what to do with me," Cass said. She knew off-worlders couldn't really read minds. Not like the stories, anyway. Not without fancy equipment that wouldn't work in Earth's corrosive datasphere. But it still made her sit up straighter. She frowned, then nodded. "If people knew about this," Cass gestured at Alpha Zero, "then someone would have told us as soon as we landed. It'd be huge news, especially among scholars. No one did, which means you're keeping it secret." G gave another slow nod. "Too smart for her own good, this one." "Which means now that I've seen it—" Cass swallowed, apparently not having realized where her own train of thought was leading. "Ah, maybe we can work something out." She didn't sound hopeful. "I ain't like that." She didn't fancy putting a pretty girl in fear of her life, but mostly she was just tired. She sat down, leaning against the edge of Alpha Zero's cockpit. "Maybe a month ago I would have thought about it, yeah? But now it doesn't matter. Nothing matters anymore." "I don't understand," Cass said. "This thing must be worth a fortune. Why hide it? And why try to scam me out of 10,000 sesterces when you're sitting on this?" "It wasn't a scam," G said, then paused at Cass's look. "All right, was a scam. Can't blame me for trying."
"I can," Cass said.
G sighed. "Blame me, then. That won't matter neither." She rubbed the warbot's flank affectionately. "Alpha Zero might be worth a fortune, but it ain't me who owns him, yeah? He's salvage."
"The law?"
Cass said uncertainly. "Ain't about the law. He belonged to whoever has the most guns, and that means the house. Same as runs Custis."
"Ah," Cass said, looking around the hangar. "And I suppose you can't exactly move him."
"Not unless it's under his own power," G said. "I could strip him down and sell the parts."
"No!" Cass said with surprising forcefulness. "Do you have any idea what you have here? This is a Third Empire warbot, almost intact. That'd be—" Her hands moved as she searched for a serious enough word. "Practically sacrilege."
"Dunno what empire he's from," G said, "but when I found him, I knew he looked killer. Thought about selling the info to the house, but slag them. I wanted him for myself, yeah? So I started working."
"Working?" Cass looked around again, this time taking in the equipment set against the walls, the welders, printers, and external processing units. "You've been fixing it?"
"Him," G said. "Yeah, me and Solomon. If we can get him moving up to the arena, ain't nobody could stop us, yeah? Could win enough to get us out of here for good. Nearly had it. Just needed a few more parts, some programming time."
"That's why you came trying to rip me off?" Cass said. "To get money for parts?" G gave a tired nod. Cass sat back on her haunches, looking thoughtful.
"So if you came after me for your 10,000 terci," G said, "you probably guessed I ain't got it."
It's not even the 10,000 I'm worried about,"
Cass said. That ridiculous bot said I owe 1,000 just for the privilege of winning. House fee, G said. Which I can't afford, Cass said. I came to ask you to cancel the bet. Apparently we can do that if we both agree. G snorted. Can't afford. Sure thing, slagger. What do you mean? You're an off-worlder, G said, though watching Cass's face, she felt herself growing less certain. Off-worlders are all loaded. Off-worlders are all loaded, else how could you get here, yeah? What's 1,000 terci to you? More than I've ever had in my account, Cass said. When G snorted again, her face darkened. Look, you're probably right that most people who visit Earth have plenty of money, but I'm only here because I talked the Scholarium into sending me on a research trip, and I could only make the bet because the system lets me access their credit. They can afford it, but if I spend a single half centy without permission... She drew a finger across her throat. Didn't think off-worlders got slashed for dead, G said. I mean, they wouldn't literally kill me, Cass said, but the next best thing, my life would be over. Right. G pursed her lips, looking thoughtful. So can we please just call off the bet? Cass said. Do that and show me the way back to the surface, and I swear to the throne I won't tell anyone about what you have here. There was genuine pain in her voice. Although, if you let me put in a quiet word to Scholar Faraday... They come and take it and leave me with nothing, G said. Probably, Cass admitted. All right, I'll keep quiet. I have a better idea, G said. She couldn't help a slow smile spreading across her face. What do you mean, a better idea? Cass said. You help me get Alpha Zero up and running. What? Cass shook her head. I can't. I mean, the code, maybe, but not here, and... Not the tech stuff, yeah? G was grinning now. You use your Sculario's credit to buy me the pots I need to finish, and bring 'em down here, since I can't show my face up top anymore. I just told you, Cass said, that the Scholarium will tear me to pieces if they catch me spending as much as you've already made me, much less more. But not literally, Cass waved dismissively. Anyway, once Alpha Zero is working, I'll take him up and fight Custis in the all-comers match next week. Put a big enough bet on me, and when I win, all your troubles are over, yeah? Pay back the Scholarium with credit to spare. Assuming you win, Cass said. Course I'll win, G scoffed. You saw the fight today. If Speedy's ankle hadn't given out, I'd have been a lock, yeah? Can you imagine what Alpha Zero will do to a clunker like that Dread Carl? Cass blinked, then shook her head. I can't. If the scholars check their accounts before the fight, or if anything goes wrong, I'm completely fucked. I wish you luck, but I can't be involved in this. Can we please just call off the bet and pretend all this never happened? Nope, she said, 'cause here's the thing. This is me only shot, yeah? I'm in debt to the house, and they will literally slash me throat, or make me into a slave, or whatever they slaggin' want. And just because I'm not going to knife a pretty girl who ain't fighting back, doesn't mean I have to roll over when she bats her eyes at me. I am not batting my eyes, Cass growled. So you can take your chances with the house and your scholars, she went on. Or you can help me and maybe fix everything, yeah? Which is it gonna be? She glared at Cass. Cass stared back, lips tightening. Fuck me with a neutronium strap-on, Cass thought, and leave me to dry on a throne-damned pulsar. She had a sudden, profound wish that Emperor had There's a page flip here. She had a sudden profound wish that Emperor Habaristus the Second and the Fourth and the Eighth hadn't succeeded in his quest to remove all possibility of time travel from the continuum. Could I borrow the time machine for just like a minute? I just need to go back and warn myself to give up on this whole old Earth trip. Just stay home, get drunk, and have a sim fling with a stranger. Resign myself to a normal third wave life, and it'll be better than all this. Sadly, tachyons were forevermore out of reach, and people were stuck with the results of their terrible decisions, even if they'd only tried their best all along, and honestly, what the actual fuck was she supposed to do? Confess everything to the scholars, accept professional ruin, and endure the smug look on a bunch of perfect first-wave faces. Or go along with Xi's madness and hope that it didn't get her literally instead of figuratively murdered. It was no choice at all, really. Better to push off the inevitable a little longer, even if it meant doing insane things, which is how Cass found herself following Xi's directions to reach the scav town under the drome. Good sense of direction or no, she'd hit at least 4 dead ends on her way, and had to laboriously back up to a place she could identify on the dumb hard copy map Xi had sketched for her. Under the skin of ruins, old Earth was a hive of metal and monocrete many layers deep. Whether she was underground or the original ground layer had been buried long ago, Cass had no idea. She followed tunnels, ladders, and stairs, with only occasional arrows painted on the walls to indicate other humans lived somewhere nearby, lit by flickering stripes of glow paint that went dark at regular intervals. How do people live without network? Parts of Sentinel would be just as much of a maze, she was sure, but you'd never visit them without an algo confidently whispering directions into your ear or laying a glowing trail over your vision. When she finally reached a scrap metal arch painted with a few incomprehensible glyphs, with steady light and human voices beyond, Cass was ready to cry with relief. The town, if that was the word for it, occupied a huge open space, boxy and high-ceilinged, with tunnels running off in all directions. Its buildings consisted of whatever the inhabitants could be bothered to throw together to get a little privacy, and they varied wildly. A snug-looking house made of chiseled monocrete blocks stood next to a scrap metal shack that looked on the verge of collapse, and beside those were derelict vehicles, tents, canvas domes, and other stranger accommodations. There was even an old warbot, stripped of its internals and turned into a shelter, laundry hanging limply from its limbs. There were more people than Cass had expected. Obviously, people still lived on Earth, but she'd had the vague idea that it was only a handful, and the kilometers of empty tunnel she'd walked through tended to reinforce that notion. But her mind was settling back into its scholarly mode, like an ancient bot returning to a familiar routine. That was a trick of the scale. With dozens, possibly hundreds of levels, the area available in just the region around the dome was colossal. The odds of running into anyone if you weren't trying to were slim. No wonder she can hide an entire Third Empire warbot without anyone noticing. Walking down the main street, the only street, really, was like stepping into some kind of ancient world sim. Everyone she saw was here, not autopiloting while their attention was off in the net, and most of them were staring at her. It didn't feel dangerous, just curious, an acknowledgement that, with her off-world looks and scholar's robe, Cass was more interesting than most people who strolled through. Cass stared back in return, fascinated. The scavs were dressed in patches of bright colors, repurposed fabric printed with logos and slogos of corporations that no longer existed, and political movements long dead. Almost everyone was engaged in some kind of work that any Sentinel citizen would delegate to bots, fixing machines and clothes, preparing food, cleaning, and 100 other domestic chores Cass couldn't even identify. Young children, so many children, more than Cass had ever seen together in one place, ran around in swarms, apparently at random, laughing and shouting. They were all so young. At 25, Cass was used to being the youngest person at gatherings that regularly included a dozen double centenarians in their gel-padded Mecha sisters. That's not a Mecha sister, that's a Mech a sister. Sorry. That's Mechassistors. I don't know, Mecha sisters could be cool though, Mecha hyphen sisters, but assistance via mechs is also good. Um, yes, we went off on a bit of a tangent there. Here, she felt like she was practically an adult, which gave her a warm feeling until her scholarly brain took a guess as to why. It's because they all die, idiot. No Mecha sisters here, no autodocs or anti-senescence drugs or oncsuppressants. I'd probably have changed that to oncosuppressants. Starships landing directly. That's something that keeps cancer from happening. Starships landing directly overhead, agrav blazing. Who cares if a bunch of carnivorous rats get extra-dimensional tumors, was it? She felt her stomach lurch. Here and there, a withered oldster sat on a stoop or helped with chores, but only a few. Which means, her remorseless, analytical self informed her, if this society is in a stable state, all but a few of those kids are going to die before they reach their first century. Maybe long before. She had no idea when people started to look old without civilized medicine. Stop, Cass. Just stop. You didn't come here to make an anthropological survey. She took a deep breath, glanced down at her scribbled map, and started walking with more purpose. Solomon's shop was easy to find, as Xi had promised, a small but sturdy shack on the main street with an open space behind it crammed with junked machines. There was a curtain in lieu of a door, so Cass pushed her way in cautiously, rapping on the doorframe. She thought it was still daytime, but there was no way to tell down here. "Just a minute!" A young man's voice came from behind another curtain, separating the front part of the shack from the rear. Out front there was a makeshift table and a couple of chairs, with a few boxes of assorted parts piled up in one corner. Cass stood and waited until the curtain parted and Solomon emerged. He was the boy she'd seen, briefly, when she'd chased Xi down the tunnel. He had pale skin like Xi, flyaway brown hair, and enormous spectacles that had been broken and patched several times. She guessed him for 17 or 18. The right side of his face was a mass of bruises, and his eye was nearly swollen shut. A line of neat stitches ran across his forehead. "How can I help?" He paused as he took Cass in, and blinked his good eye. After the pause, he repeated, "How can he help you, madam?" "My name is Cass," Cass said. She lowered her voice. "She sent me." Solomon sucked in a breath. "Is she okay?" "She's fine," Cass said. "She told me to tell you she's hiding you know where." Cass frowned. "Are you okay?" "Me?" Solomon touched the side of his face and winced. "All heal. I tried to get in Custis's way, and he didn't care for it." He breathed out. "But she got away. That's good." He paused again, then shook his head. "So where do you come into it?" "It's a long story." "It usually is with G," Solomon said with a pained smile. "The short version is I'm helping her with her project. Much against my will. She sent me here to get the parts she needs." "The parts?" His good eye narrowed. "She explained how much that's going to cost, I assume." "I've got credit," Cass said, suppressing a wince. Solomon whistled. "I guess off-welders really are as rich as they say." "Don't push it, kid." Cass maintained a straight face with an effort. "So what do we need to do?"
We can head over to Gaitha's, Solomon said. She'll have most of what we need, and she can get the rest. Your credit is with the house, I assume.
Cass nodded.
That should be fine then. Are you ready now?
Another nod. Solomon stretched, winced, and led the way out the door, with Cass trailing behind him. He walked with a slight limp, too, she noticed. "You're a mechanic?" she said.
Of sorts.
He looked embarrassed.
Nothing by off-worlder standards, obviously, but I've picked up a few things.
If you put that warbot G piloted together, it... if you put that warbot G piloted together, that's impressive by anyone's standards.
He snorted. It didn't work out so well, yeah?
Still... Cass sought for something to fill the awkward silence as they trudged on. How long have the two of you known each other?
Since we were kids, Solomon said. G's parents took care of me for a while.
And...
Cass trailed off. She had no idea what to ask, what would be considered polite conversation and what might be hopelessly rude. It didn't help that without a network she couldn't read Solomon's ephemera, the signals his persona would give off, telling everything from his romantic preferences to his interests and comfort levels in various topics. Once again, Cass felt like she'd lost a limb or a sense. At least the boy seemed just as awkward. He cleared his throat and said, "How long are you on Earth for?"
"I'm supposed to be here a week," Cass said, "for research."
Research?
Old tech. Archaeocode is my specialty.
He perked up.
You'll find plenty of that here, though obviously the datasphere has destroyed a lot of it. There's still a lot of scraps, though, if you know where to look.
Where should I look?
Cass said, genuinely curious.
Oh, ROM templates, cold storage, cheap archives, anywhere the physical storage media is sequestered from the processing units, basically. Sometimes the nits get into that too, of course, but not always. There are old libraries. He paused. Here's Gaitha's place.
Cass gave an inward sigh. If not for G's scheming, meeting Solomon would have been a pleasant surprise. He might have even been able to help her find material for her research that would have made the whole trip worthwhile.
Now Throne knows if I'll have time for any of that.
She fought down another spike of useless anger. Gaitha's place was just a scrapyard surrounded by a fence, without even a pretense at looking like a building. A middle-aged woman in a bright orange headscarf, presumably Gaitha, paused from shouting at two unrepentant children and looked up at them as they arrived.
"Hey, Saul," she said. "You get your face caught in a compressor?"
I'm fine, Guy, thanks for asking, Saul drawled. I've got an order for you.
Gaitha's face went hard.
"I said I'm not floating you another centy. The fact that your warbot got torn to scrap doesn't make me more inclined to be generous."
I've got her credit this time, Solomon said, or my partner here does.
"I wondered what she was doing here."
Gaitha turned to Cass.
"You sure this little slag isn't putting one over on you?"
Solomon has been very helpful, Cass said stiffly.
"Fair enough."
Gaitha ambled over and produced a battered tablet connected to a heavily insulated hardline.
"Scan here."
Cass proffered her hand. Manual identity scans, another barbarism unheard of on Sentinel, and Gaitha surveyed the results. Her expression unkinked slightly.
"Will that cover it?"
Cass said.
"That'll about cover the whole slagging yard, if you want it,"
Gaitha said.
"Just let me know what you need."
Here's a list, Solomon said, handing over a rumpled note, and we'll have a look around, too.
Gaitha grunted, peering at the note. Solomon led Cass out among the broken machines that were piled up around the yard.
"She's charming,"
Cass muttered.
She's not so bad, Solomon said. She's not wrong that G and I have taken advantage of her goodwill. G burned every bridge she had to get Speedy up and running for the fight.
"All in the hopes of fixing up Alpha Zero?"
When Solomon nodded, Cass shook her head.
"Seems like a long shot."
That's what I told her.
Solomon said.
"She didn't listen."
You've met her, haven't you?
Cass snorted a laugh, but she caught Solomon's slightly wistful smile. She hesitated, then asked,
"Are the two of you She had no idea what style of romantic relationship might be the norm here on Earth, or how people might refer to it, so she settled for clearing her throat and lamely finished, Together? Me and she? Solomon shook his head. She's more like a big sister. You're more her type than I am. Ah, that was another problem with the lack of ephemera. On Sentinel, Cass would have been able to tell at a glance what G's preferences were gender, phenotype, personality, to whatever extent she felt like revealing them, and vice versa. Not that I've been broadcasting my preferences much. She'd kept herself locked down since joining the Scholarium for fear of letting any entanglements intrude on her work, keeping her assignations to sim flings. Still, if they had met in a sim, G might have been intriguing. Not fucking likely. She shook her head. So what are we looking for? Some kind of external processor we can use to get at Alpha Zero's control OS, Solomon said. We're going to have to rebuild a lot of it, and we'll need something hardened to work as the near end. I figure we'll rip a unit out of a dead bot. Look for military. The older the better. Got it. Just a processing unit or the whole input stack? He looked at her owlishly, a bit of respect creeping into his glance. Just the unit. We convert the rest of the stack if we need to. Probably a crime matrix then, instead of an arachnoform. Cass pointed. That looks like the sensor bay from a Link support unit. Would that work? When the talk turned to tech, Solomon's residual caution around off-worlders dropped away, and he became practically chatty. It also became apparent that he knew his stuff, to a degree Cass had to admit she hadn't expected. She'd spent most of her life reading about old processors, data systems, and code, but Solomon had been arms deep in the stuff for almost as long, and it showed. Pretty soon she felt like she was running to keep up. In the end, they rejected the Link support unit, too damaged, a surgery bay controller, wrong inputs, and a recon drone. Cass pegged the processor type as known corruptible. They settled on an 8th Empire Grenadier bot, badly slagged around the edges but with an intact core. Gaitha added it to the small pile of pieces she was building and punched a few numbers into her tablet. Cass blanched a little when she saw the totals. Doesn't matter, she told herself. Either G's plan would work, or they'd put it all back. Hopefully before anyone noticed it was gone, or else she was irrevocably fucked, and the scale of the fucking probably didn't make a difference. But still, she couldn't help but imagine the arch-scholar's face when he was told. In other circumstances, I'd probably pay to watch. Oh, thanks for tuning in, Uralino, via Twitch. Normally commenting via YouTube. Good to know. I stream to both because I can. YouTube will, if I ever had to choose it, it'd have to be YouTube just because it's easier to keep it saved on there and the requirements are lower for me to have it recorded. Where were we? Cass parted with Solomon after he'd drawn her yet another map and promised to get her a meeting place when the parts were delivered, so she could take them down to G. By this time it was, apparently, late evening. Cass followed the map back toward the surface, heading for the quarters she vaguely remembered the tour company had promised them, adjacent to the drome itself. Her navigation skills seemed to be improving, or else Solomon was better at drawing maps than G, which seemed likely, because she only took one wrong turn. Emerging above ground at last, she found herself on an apparently endless plain of weathered monocrete, which had once been a storage space for personal vehicles of visitors to the drome. The idea of owning a vehicle, which would then spend the vast majority of its time unused, felt vaguely obscene to Cass, like the height of Ninth Empire arrogance and waste.
In this later age, the lot had become an ideal place to drop prefabricated buildings, all glamorously styled and looking wildly out of place in the wrecked landscape. Cass was headed for the one that said Homeward Voyages, was greeted by a cheery security officer in branded armor, and was admitted once she'd provided sufficient assurance that she was in fact Scholar Zicticus III. Faraday, Van Alt, and Gneisen were sitting around a table in the common room, learning to play some sort of analog card game from the company flack assigned to entertain them. Cass ignored them, headed for the door with her name on it, and collapsed into the deliciously soft bed. Sleep came instantly, even without her algorithmic meditation aids. When she woke the next morning, she spent a long time in the shower. The tour company might not have been able to provide its customers with a civilized network, but some luxuries at least could be imported, presumably at great expense. The events of the previous day had left her covered in grime and sweat, and simply scrubbing it off and dressing in a clean outfit, a practical coverall this time, suitable for field work, helped her state of mind immensely. By the time she emerged into the common room, where the table was set with an elaborate breakfast, she was feeling almost optimistic. "Morning, Scholar," she said to Faraday, who was poking through a small bowl of assorted fruits.
Morning, Cass,
Faraday said. Cass sat down next to him and helped herself to toast and skyroot pods. "Where are the others?"
Gneisen had a desire to see the warbot from yesterday's match, Faraday said. Van Alt agreed to accompany her.
"Sounds exciting," Cass said. "You weren't interested?"
I wanted to speak to you, Faraday said, and I thought it was best done alone.
Oh, fuck. Cass's good mood vanished immediately. Fortunately, she was halfway through chewing a pod, so she could mask her confusion as she slowly popped the sweet seeds between her teeth. "What about?" she said, when she was sure she could control her tone. Maybe they don't know. It seemed unlikely. What else would account for that dark tone?
Your behavior yesterday,
Faraday said. He shifted, looking uncomfortable, not an expression you often saw on a first wave. "What about it?" Cass said, stalling.
Will you make me spell it out?
Faraday sighed.
You left the party arranged for us by our gracious hosts, and you were later seen in a vagrant community.
Ah, Cass took a deep breath. "The thing is—"
I understand the allure of the forbidden, Faraday said. I was young once, loath though your generation is to admit it. But intimate services were restricted to Sims on Sentinel for good reasons, including the safety of all concerned. Obviously, old Earth falls into a different jurisdiction, but that does not change the dictates of ethics and prudence.
Wait, Cass said. Wait. You think I was, what, visiting some kind of brothel?
There's no need to be ashamed. It's merely an error of your judgment, not unexpected given your youth and class.
My class? Faraday raised one delicately cultivated eyebrow.
Everyone knows third waves are more susceptible to carnal influences.
Only because nobody would fuck you for all the creds in the Google vault, you withered old turd. Cass kept a straight face, but only just.
In any event, Faraday said, I wish to speak with you alone so we could resolve this matter between ourselves. Gneisen is young and promising, and part of my role here is to protect her from any influences that might damage her career.
I see. Cass let out a long breath.
Good.
Faraday turned back to her fruit, face a little flushed.
I trust we can speak no more of the matter.
Of course. Wouldn't want to be indelicate. Cass pushed her plate away. But I think there may be some real research potential here. I've had several excellent leads. Faraday said. I may need some support once I run them down. Transport arrangements, that sort of thing.
If you really believe you've found something, you can run it by me and Van Alt. Gneisen would have to come and confirm your findings, of course.
Gneisen? Faraday smiled thinly.
Of course, her family contributed generously to the Scholarium. They are going to expect appropriate results.
Appropriate? Cass fixed Firidy's gaze. You're joking.
Cass, Firidy sighed, you cannot be that naive. What did you think was the purpose of this expedition?
To further the knowledge of the Scholarium.
Yes, of course, in the general sense, but specifically,
Firidy waved a hand.
for Gneissen to continue on her path to becoming a first-rate scholar, she must publish well-respected research. Her family expects this trip to provide it.
So what are the rest of us here for?
To support her.
To do it for her, in other words, Cass said.
Van Alt and I are to serve as mentors.
And me?
Once she has made a discovery, no doubt there will be a great deal of data gathering and other minutiae.
I see. Cass pushed herself to her feet.
Apparently, I ought to have clarified your position earlier, Firidy said. I assumed it had been made understood to you.
That I'm supposed to be an assistant to some 20-year-old who couldn't find a warbot in a closet without an algo?
Cass, Firidy sighed, this is how the Scholarium works. You know it as well as I do. Perform well, and the arch-scholar will take notice. In a few years, perhaps.
He'll trust me to clean the bathrooms? Cass shoved the chair away and the chair back in and turned away.
Cass! Firidy snapped. Where are you going?
Back to the fucking brothel, Cass shouted back. Back to the fucking brothel, Cass shouted back and slammed the door behind her. For the record, the reason I have brief reading breaks that can last several seconds um, is because I have to drink water and I don't want people to hear glug glug glurp glurp, lip smack, snort noises as I clear my skull. So it's for you, so that you're not like, oh my god, it's a disgusting ogre on the other side of the line. I could still be one. You don't know, and you never will. Hopefully. I don't plan on ever recording myself visually doing this unless, I don't know, literally everyone would have to say, do that. At which point I'd be like, maybe not. The hangar doors ground open, startling Xi out of a light doze. Her hand went to her knife, a useless gesture. If the house had found her, the game was up regardless. And she only relaxed when she recognized Cass standing beside a powered cart full of miscellaneous scrap.
About time.
A low-grade anxiety in Xi's gut vanished. She'd had faith in Solomon, of course, and she thought Cass was neatly trapped, but there was always a chance one or the other would slag things up.
But here she is. So far, so good, yeah?
Xi hopped down from the gantry, not bothering with the ladder, and trotted over to meet Cass. The off-worlder had traded her diaphanous silk for a practical working outfit, which showed good sense, although Xi found herself obscurely disappointed. Cass's face was thunderous, and she gestured the cart drone forward with a grumpy wave.
You found Solomon okay, yeah?
More or less, Cass said.
Killer. And he found what we need?
Almost everything, Cass said. He's waiting on a few pieces. She paused, then added, Curtis roughed him up pretty bad, you know. Sorry, I keep reading that as Curtis. Custis. Custis roughed him up pretty bad, you know. Xi's chest clenched.
Slagging scumfuck. He'll get his when we get Alpha Zero going, yeah?
She forced down the boiling anger and blew out a breath.
It's all gonna be all right.
He says he will. Cass nodded at the cart. You don't need his help for this.
Tweaks are mostly data side,
Xi said, surveying the gear.
That I can handle.
Hopefully. But Solomon wasn't any better at patching code together than she was. Xi glanced up at Alpha Zero with a frown.
If we can't get the OS up after all this...
She pushed the worry down into the same pit she'd shoved the rage. Later.
Looks like everything's going neat and clean, she said aloud. I'll have Sol get in touch with you for those last few pieces. I'm sure you've got scholar stuff to attend to, yeah?
Cass glared at her. Are you going to cancel the bet? I got what you wanted.
Better not, G said. Sorry, you could turn me into the house otherwise.
I figured, Cass said with a long-suffering sigh. I figured. In that case, I'm going to stay right here and make sure you don't run out on me now that you've got what you want. She wasn't sure exactly how the scholar intended to stop her if she did want to welch on their agreement, but given Cass's expression, she decided not to argue. She summoned the cart to drop its load on a lifter in the corner, and then rode up with the scrap to the gantry, where she could get to Alpha Zero's cockpit. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Cass look around for a seat, then flop moodily onto a monocrete block in one corner. She pulled an old-style book from the pocket of her coverall and started reading, after a couple of false starts figuring out how to turn the pages. Figuring that it was safest to ignore her for the moment, G set to sorting through what Solomon had sent her. Mostly it was bits and pieces of machines that were broken but contained some infotech component that might be useful, so the first step was disassembling them to get at the intact pieces. This was long and tedious work, removing mag screws and unsoldering boards one at a time until some critical processing unit or conduit came into view. G bent to it diligently, a curl of smoke rising from her laser cutter to coil lazily in the air above her. From time to time she glanced up at Cass, who was staring ferociously at her book, looking increasingly annoyed. Finally, G couldn't take it any more.
Not enjoying the story?
She said as she cut through the fasteners on a fixed-width, six-way entangled bus.
The what?
Cass snapped.
The book.
It's something about tribal warfare in the pre-spaceflight era, spears and combustion engines, that sort of thing.
Looks like it's bothering you.
It's not bothering me, Cass frowned. It's just broken, like everything else on this stupid planet. It doesn't hyperlink, you can't get definitions for anything, and I keep losing my place. G tried to stifle a laugh, but couldn't quite manage it. Cass shot her a nasty look. Like to see you navigate a six-sided political romance polygon sim. Like to see you navigate a six-sided political romance polygon sim, the scholar muttered.
Dunno what that is, G said, finally working the conduit free, but sounds killer, yeah?
Cass looked back down at her book for a few moments, trying to focus, then let out another long sigh and tossed it aside.
So what's eating you?
G said as she pondered the next piece. Apart from being blackmailed into helping with a crazy scheme that in all probability will ruin my career and get me sent for re-education.
Sure, G said. Apart from that.
Cass looked up at her for a moment as though considering her options, then slumped back against the wall. I had a talk with the senior scholar on our mission this morning. She made it clear that I'm not going to be allowed to do any real work while I'm here on Earth, even if I manage to resolve this insanity. G chuckled.
Off-worlders never do any real work anyway, eh? You're still getting fed and watered, so what does it all matter?
It's... Never mind. Cass settled her chin against her chest. You wouldn't understand.
Try me, G said. Picking these DNA capacitors off this thing is boring as slag, yeah?
I'd offer to help, Cass muttered, but I'm sure I'd only fuck things up.
Probably.
There was a long pause. I'm a third wave, Cass said eventually. Scholar Zicticus 3. You know what that means?
Not really.
G's tongue poked out of the corner of her mouth as she extracted a particularly stubborn capacitor with a pair of fine-point tweezers. Tiny organic threads connecting it to the board snapped and curled up one by one. It's down to when your ancestors left Earth, Cass said. The first wave went out and settled the 1,000 worlds before the First Empire, back in prehistory. No transfer points back then, not even fold drives, so it was just the craziest shit you can imagine. Cryosleep ships that took hundreds of years to get where they were going. Generation ships where your great-great-grandchildren would arrive. You had to be special to head out on those trips. The best and brightest in all of civilization, the first waves like to say.
Or the weirdest, yeah?
G lifted another spiraling conduit, free.
Yeah.
Cass shrugged. Anyway, a lot of them didn't make it, but those that did set themselves up pretty well on the new colonies. After the fold drive came along and the first empire got going, the second wave left Earth, which was getting pretty bad by then, and wanted in. Fold drives were expensive as anything, so this was all wealthy types looking to start new lives. The first waves welcomed them, mostly.
Rich bastards are always rich bastards,
G commented. Then came the Third Empire, and transfer points, and the fracture. Everything falls apart. Earth is, well, turning into what it is now. But it's easy to get a ship out to the transfer point and turn up at one of the colonies uninvited. That's the third wave. We got let in out of charity, and the first and seconds never let us forget it.
How long ago was this?
Depends on the colony. For Sentinel, maybe 1,000 years.
You're slagging kidding.
She sat up and stared down at Cass.
They look down their noses at you for whose great-grandmas begged off of whose 1,000 years ago?
Pretty much. Cass's shoulders were slumped. Like Faraday says, that's just the way it is. So this little first wave girl is going to get credit for anything we find here, and I'm supposed to take notes and deal with minutiae.
Sounds awful.
G said, and realized that, for a moment, she meant it. She felt a stab of regret for dragging Cass into her own problems, and pushed that down as well.
Too slagging soft for me own good. Course, around here, career recognition isn't as much of a problem as finding enough algae sludge to fill your belly.
I know. Cass leaned back. I saw the scav town. If I swallow my pride and help Gnyson, I'll go back to Sentinel, get fed by bots, play around in Sims, and live to be 200. Horrible fate, right?
200? Oh, you're having fun with me, yeah? You'd be shriveled up like a dead roach.
The Arch Scholar definitely resembles a dead bug sometimes, but he's 212. Cass pushed herself to her feet. Fuck it. I'm not doing any good here. I'll go check with Solomon and see if he has those parts.
Thought I needed an eye kept on me.
Are you going to run out with Alpha Zero when you're finished?
Nope.
G popped another conduit free.
Gonna squash Custis proper first, yeah?
Good enough for me. The scholar rolled her shoulders wearily. I'll be back. Solomon reported that nothing new had come in, which meant 2 long trudges through flickering, empty tunnels for nothing. Honestly, though, that suited Cass's mood better than giving G history lessons. Lots of time alone meant plenty of opportunity to feel sorry for herself. She bought a few more books on the Scholarium Centi just out of curiosity. Paper books weren't exactly unknown on Sentinel. They were easy enough to fabricate on any printer, but they were more decorative than actually useful. Why read dead words on a page when you could see them alive and vibrant in your augmented vision, each a portal to a million other possibilities if you so much as let your attention linger on it for a moment? But there was something tantalizing in the battered paperbacks. Possibly it was the feeling of not knowing what to expect when you couldn't access a rear-view average or an algo précis of any text instantly. In any event, it gave her something to do that wasn't taking Gnyson's fucking notes. Once again, she turned up at the Homeward Voyage's shelter long after dark, and received a glower from Faraday and a bland smile from his husband, Vanolt. Cass ignored both. Didn't they say that Faraday was a she earlier? I think he might have just mistyped the second. Whatever. Cass ignored both, went into her room, and read until she was pretty sure everyone else was in bed. Then she emerged, in search of leftovers from dinner. Her curiosity in the scav town hadn't extended to trying the food.
She'd pulled a plate of sliced ham and pickled butter wings out of the cold storage and was just settling in when another bedroom door opened and Gneisen emerged. Cass did her best not to make eye contact. Who am I to impose on a future first-rate scholar? But Gneisen waved and raised her eyes conspiratorially, then pulled out the chair opposite her. Gneisen was tall and slender, like most first waves, with pale gray hair that sparkled with metallic silver flowing like a curtain down her back. She wore pajamas in place of her scholar's robe, and she was without her customary cosmetics, which made her look a little more human. Her huge, dark eyes were alight with mischief, and Cass greeted her warily. "Want some?" she said. Greeted her warily, not wearily. Cass greeted her warily. "Want some?" she said. "No, thanks," Gneisen said. "They fed us over at the drum, and again when we got back. My health algos are going to be furious with me when we get back to civilization." She waggled her eyebrows again, sighed, and snatched a butterwing off Cass's plate. "Okay, just one." "Did you get a look at the dread, Carl?" Cass said politely, while Gneisen sucked juice off her fingers. "Yeah," the girl said, and sighed. "It's not as impressive up close." "Hopefully it at least gave you a few ideas for the direction of your research," Cass said, her tone perfectly level. "I told Faraday to check up on some things," Gneisen said, waving her hand dismissively. "But tomorrow I was hoping you and I could go out together." "Me and you?" Cass blinked. "For research?" "Strenuous research." Gneisen leaned forward. "Faraday told me you've already made a start." Cass put the eyebrow waggling together with her conversation with a senior scholar the previous morning, reached a conclusion, and suppressed a groan. "He told you I was out at a brothel." "Hey, no judgment from me. No Sims here. What else are we supposed to do? People have needs." She grinned. "I'll square it with him. I just need you to show me around." "Isn't Faraday going to expect you to be doing research?" "He won't complain unless he wants my grandma's tearing his Sims down around his ears. Relax." She spread her arms. "We're on Earth. Anything goes here, right? That's the point." She grabbed another butterwing and popped it into her mouth. For a moment, Cass considered it. Gneisen might be able to paper over the debt she'd run up on the Scholarium's credit. It was more likely to work than G getting Alpha Zero running and winning a jackpot in the Drome, anyway. But even if I got her to promise to help me, what are the odds she follows through? Gneisen was a first wave, like Faraday and the Arch Scholar. When push came to shove, they didn't think of third waves as real people. We're just props for them to reward or punish. "Come on," Gneisen said. "You don't know how close my grandma's watched me back home. I haven't had a decent in-flesh fuck in months." "That does sound rough." Cass put on a sympathetic expression, only slightly curdled at the edges, and started working on extricating herself from the conversation. And that is where we will call it for today. I thought I'd make faster progress than that, but that's okay. We're fine. Sorry about the weird technical issue at the beginning. We'll just read the other half next week. Anyway, I don't know what happened at the beginning. This was a different problem. So far, I've been able to keep the other thing that was interrupting my streams from happening. I'm still not sure what the cause is, but I have a sneaking suspicion I have now twigged and found at least a functional solution. So I have a dual monitor display, and Windows is mucho estupido. And I think, and recently it started making it so that my default start screen was on one monitor and I want it on the other one. And the one that used to be the default monitor is the one where I would have the window for my streaming software. And I wasn't having problems until the other monitor became the default, which I've tried to fix.
And by default, I don't mean primary monitor. It's something more fundamental than that, where it's where the start bar will appear um, on boot up or coming out of sleep mode, and it's appearing on the wrong monitor, the monitor where I don't want to have the window. So the way I've managed to temporarily jury rig, whichever one is the original, I don't actually know if it's jerry rig or jury rig. I've seen both. Anyway, back on track. The way I've managed to get around it is by having it on that monitor. And so far, no problems have occurred. Now, this is too early to say whether that's working. Another thing I've tried doing is having something semi-resource intensive running in the background, um, a game or something else. Because I think what's happening is Windows 10 is like trying to go to sleep and not twigging to the fact that I have something going. I don't know this for sure. And if it's on the wrong monitor, it's trying to revert that to the other side, and it's basically causing a system lockup. So far, I'm not having problems now that I'm going with this the way I've got it now. We'll see if that continues. It's kind of annoying because it's harder for me to see at a glance the my audio levels. And seeing the what do they call that? The audio mixer. I used to know this. I took a course in broadcasting. Why don't I remember this off the top of my head? Your sound level gauge. Merriam-Webster says jury rig was first. Okay, I will keep that in mind. Thank you very much, Uralino, for looking that up on the spot. I appreciate that a lot. Incidentally, hi to Optical Antenna. I did see you. I did not comment. I apologize. Anyway, it's working. It's dumb. It shouldn't work. This is what we or I in the IT profession call classic computer voodoo magic bullshit. Much like turning it off and on again. I'm not complaining that it works. I'm complaining that I don't understand why it works. I'm complaining that there's a problem in the first place. I could not tell you why it's working. I have no idea. I have speculation based on a certain degree of experience, but I can't tell you for sure because I've got nothing that can that has been able to adequately diagnose why I was having a problem in the first place. I found a solution that temporarily works. It's working. I don't give a flying fig beyond that, other than a general level of inconvenience. Anyway, back to my point of I keep an eye on my audio level thing showing that, oh yes, you're making mouth noises and it's being picked up by a digital display. Or in the good old days, it would be like one of those sine wave things. I don't know why this is eluding my brain right now. It's really disappointing because I used to know all this. Getting old sucks. I've made the joke before, but getting old sucks. The second thing you lose is your memory, and I can't remember what the first is. The second thing to go with old age is your memory, and I cannot remember the first. Whatever the line is. I'm mangling it. It doesn't matter. Anyway, the way I've been able to tell when I've had a problem, when I was having the old problem, was I would see my audio levels freeze. So it's like, oh, it would freeze like mid-sentence or something, and it's caught at like, oh, it's like, up X number of decibels. QED, something's broken. Something's not displaying properly. And then if I try to shut everything down, I can't. Opening up Task Manager, no joy. Opening up Start, turn on, shut down, not working. Hotkeys, not working. The only thing that does it is a manual cutoff. And doing a quick hard restart button, which a hard reboot, appropriately enough. Ha ha, hoo hee, ha ha ha, ha ha. I'm laughing. I'm furious, but I'm laughing. A hard reboot, if you will. You see, it's funny because it's the name of the book that we just read half of right now. Yeah, it's pretty funny. He's laughing on the inside. He's furious. Anyway, where were we? We were rambling, right? And then it reboots, and then everything works until it doesn't anymore. So far, I've been able to avoid it. Whatever happened this time, I think, was a network issue. Because I didn't have to restart my computer to make it happen.
I'll see what I can do. I will try pushing it. I'll try like having it half on, half off, because one of my monitors is smaller than the other and slightly angled, so I can like see it a lot more easily out of the corner of my eye when I am sitting back and reading. Because I'm usually reading. So this is a general thing. Typically, when I'm reading stuff on this stream, I am using a hard copy of a book. It is not always the case. Usually, short stories, if they're not in a collected volume, ones that I'm like reading off a website or stuff I've snagged off of Project Gutenberg, or the times I've read from like Interzone or Astounding Stories, those I've got on a screen and I'm reading on a screen. Um, but most of the time, I'm reading a hard physical copy. Um, Not necessarily out of any moral principle per se. Um, I think piracy is fine if you can't get at something, period, otherwise. Um, but more, I just prefer reading from a physical book. I have a somewhat easier time with that. It's there's that tactile response and all that. Sure, I could use a tablet. I've contemplated getting a tablet because I've got a hefty ebook collection that I just haven't really gotten to reading most of because they're ebooks and they're not a physical book. So it's something I've contemplated getting, finding like a Kindle or similar on the cheap, or not a Kindle. There's another one that's more open source and you don't have to worry about getting specific files from them. That'll just like do read EPUBs and PDFs, which is all I really need. Um, I haven't done it though, and I'm not going to do it on my phone. I don't see a big reason I don't do that is out of a general disdain and frustration with the user interfaces that accompany those and touch screens in general. It's not really a moral or ethical qualm so much as it's a I'm a Luddite, I guess. I'm not a Luddite. I have a phone. Um, it took me a very long time to adopt a smartphone in any capacity because I just didn't. I just needed a phone that was a phone. That's really all I use mine for anyway. I don't use it much as a multimedia device. I have taken to putting music on the thing and that sort of thing. But wow, we really went off on a tangent today. Anyway, so that's the first half of Hard Reboot by Django Wexler. I feel like its heart as a book is in the right place. It's rousing. We're going to get to sexy bits. Um, for me, the sexy bits are the giant robots, but other human relations stuff. Um, it's not going to be particularly graphic. It is. It's not. So no worries there. It's not going to be pornography or of any stretch. I've read far more lurid things on stream as is, and haven't really suffered for it. I'll never forget awkwardly reading through the sex scene in Snow Crash and being like, Jesus Christ, they're gonna totally ban me, so I'm gonna power through this as fast as I can and hope the auto sensors don't detect. And then nothing fucking happened, and I sounded super awkward and tentative, like, oh my god, he's a blushing person, he's reading a sex scene, oh my god, he's got acne, or something, and just plowing through it. Um, Mostly because it goes on for pages. But since then, I've just been like, who gives a fuck? Pardon my French, who cares? It doesn't matter. We'll just plow through. Or just read through it. We're not going to make it hot, but we're going to read what's written. Might make it hot. Um, so after we finish this, we'll finish this next week. After we finish this, I will probably read at the very least the first volume of the Full Metal Panic novel series. Um, those all came out in as light novels, which I think you could reasonably call a novella. They're pretty short individually, but there's an edition, and I can't remember the publisher. There's an edition that's a hardcover and collects, I think, for each volume, it's three of the light novels in it. Um, it's quite entertaining. If you've seen the animated series of Full Metal Panic, you pretty much know what to expect. They haven't gotten, for the animated adaptation, they haven't gotten to the end bit though, and things get pretty nuts at the end bit. I was not prepared for how crazy things were going to get at the end bit. Uh, they get pretty wild. Um, but yeah, I'd love for more companies to to bring stuff over to get localized from Japan and China. There's been a recent boom of updated modern editions of stuff coming from China. There's been a couple releases of Journey to the West. There's been the Legend of the Condor Heroes, which I am going to keep reading at some point. Right now, it's a matter of fitting it in um, with all the other stuff that I'm reading at once. Might do that after I get through Absolution. Do the second volume of that. Um, there's something else. Oh yeah, all the stuff by Shijin Liu. And this has all kind of just been in the last 20 years. There have been editions of Journey to the West and Romance of the Three Kingdoms that have come out in the halcyon days of yore, decades ago. But it doesn't tend to get obvious play and showing up. Uh, Partly because in the modern era, because until recently, because the entire landscape of literature has kind of changed irrevocably with the advent of first Amazon and then just uh, people using smartphones for things, having access to a high enough resolution screen to read things on pretty efficiently and effectively. So the entire publishing landscape is a totally different beast. Not that I'd have much experience in that other than watching it happen as it occurred, because I'm not a creative type. I've never published anything. So for all I know, as far as I know, it's actually very easy to get stuff published, but the problem you run into now is because the bar is so low, it's a signal to noise ratio issue is the point I'm getting at, that I was originally getting at, that I totally forgot about midway through the point and then caught up back to whatever. It's a signal to noise ratio thing. When anybody can print off a book for nothing, for peanuts, and have it published for peanuts, you have to have some way of getting that out so that people actually notice it. Okay, do you get it into a bookstore? Well, you're going to need a publisher for that. Because unless it's a mom and pop that's like keeping an eye on everything, and most of those are going to be used bookstores, realistically. At least in my experience, they're usually most mom and pops are used bookstores, or they're a chain. There's a couple pretty good bookstore chains, but they tend not they diversify because you can't really be a chain dedicated to that in the wake of Amazon, which just kind of destroyed that entire industry of brick and mortars, um, particularly for books. Um, where was I going with this? I did have a plan. I lost it. This is just general ramble. Um, so if you're still tuned in at this point, you're doing it for the ramble, not for anything else. Where was I? Right. So yeah, Amazon destroyed brick and mortars. Right, publishing, signal to noise. And that's kind of a problem you see. It's really funny how you can see that problem with a lot of other things. Music is an excellent example. Signal to noise for music, the music landscape right now is wild. Um, so I and a lot of other people, I'm sure, lament, hey, why aren't people making good music like they used to? And it's like, okay, on the one hand, I'm getting old. My tastes haven't changed enough, or haven't adapted with the times, or there's either a nostalgia, rose-tinted goggles thing, or whatever. And I'm out here being like, oh, I just want music that appeals to me. I want more music. And there's tons of music being made by artists all the time. You have no idea that it's being made because there's no way it's getting funneled to your attention when there's so much else happening. Um, Bandcamp is fairly useful for finding stuff, but for getting a lot of this stuff. But it's a matter of you kind of need to know what you're looking for, and that's sort of the difficulty in this current environment. And it's not exclusive to music. Movies probably are the least affected, but they're on segregated platforms as well, and that's really clear as being part of the problem. Or you have producers like Warner Brothers that are like, oh, have something get created and then can it, get rid of it, and just bury it before it ever actually gets released for reasons that I can only guess at. Tax breaks is apparently their reasons. It seems insane that that should even work as a viable business model, but apparently it has for them, or was. I don't know if they're still doing that. I assume they are. Um, you see it as well with the video game industry, where there's just
the bar is very low. The bar for entry to make a video game and distribute it is very low, but you're never going to get any you're not going to push any numbers. You're not going to sell any because nobody's going to know it exists. You run in it's just one of those interesting recurring paradigms that you see. Um, that makes you think that maybe the universe is coded in a very specific way, but is more likely just to be human nature patterns happening over and over and over and over and over again, and we're just like kind of locked in and don't do anything. We're really going off the rails on this one. I gotta stop. My skull is plugged uh, between traveling long, lonely, dusty roads and God forbid you're in the animation industry right now. I don't even know where to start. I've been out of touch with the animation industry of all stripes, but like for a while now, but like every time I look in on it to see how things are going there, I'm just like, where is everything? What happened? That's also a case of suffering from old talent dying out in a lot of cases and not being replaced with new talent. There is new talent coming in, but they don't know the old ways. Um, so they're making it in a very different way, and that means they kind of have a different mentality as to how it's made. That doesn't necessarily jive super well with me, but because I haven't watched any of those to completion, modern animated series, I can't really, for the most part, I can't really say with any degree of accuracy that they would or wouldn't be for me. On an indie game dev standpoint, only way I've seen success is from devs who are able to make YouTube channels and get tens of thousands of subs, says a cookie. Yes, that has happened. Sometimes, in the case of stuff popping out on, say, Steam, you just get lucky one day and the algorithm happens to look your way favorably. You manage to capture lightning in a bottle. Success stories like, what is it called? Vampire Survivors. Um, which is this otherwise very simple game, isn't a new formula for a game. Yes, and the series yes, getting canceled after 2 seasons because expectations are too high or whatever from the corporate overlord. Yeah, so for Survivors, I had a cogent point to make here. Uh, like nothing that game does is new. Not a single thing it did was new at the time. It's taking an old formula that just happened to get play and noticed like, I don't know, months to half a year after it had first come out, when the algorithm threw some Twitch streamer or something a bone. Um, and the algorithm was like, oh, people must notice this now. And so everybody noticed, and it was very successful. I'm not saying Vampire Survivors is bad. It's not. It's not at all bad. It's fun. It's addictive. It has a very simple playing curve. It does what it does very well. It's straightforward. It's dirt cheap. It's very good at what it does. Um, but it shouldn't have been successful. And so now you have a million people trying to do the same thing. Because by any sane metric, it shouldn't have been successful, but it just kind of happened. It got lucky. And that's kind of what seems to be happening is like luck is in the hands of these algorithms as to whether you get noticed or not. And and even if it weren't in the hands of algorithms, it would be down to the whim of the people, and that comes down to static or signal to noise ratio. Um, and the indie game scene, like I've played dozens of indie games that are just like bangers, but will never get the attention, funding, and polishing they need to become really, really exquisite. Or ones that are just that exquisite and just nobody notices they exist. They're everywhere. And then like it costs money to keep renewing your license, I guess, on say Steam as a platform. So eventually they have to be taken down because they're getting no money in. They're getting nothing flowing in, so they can't keep feeding the beast. I don't know how much that recurring fee is. I'd actually love to know. Um, I surmise that there is one because A, Steam has to keep the servers on. Valve has to keep the servers on for Steam. They're making more money than God right now. They're making a ton of money as it is, but you know, I'm doing the time worn gesture of rubbing one's fingers together in the universal money money symbol. You can always have more. Um, but it's pretty crazy. It's just wild to watch. None of this is taking into account the fact that the Steam forums for most everything are just insanely toxic by any sane definition of the term. It's just like there's plenty of Steam forums that are fine. They're generally the less populated ones, but man, it's very social media style, and it only got worse when they added little animated stickers that you could reward posts with. So people go fishing for digital reward points because the little Skinnerian reward box in their head gets flicked, and they get a tiny little millidrop nano dose of endorphin hit or dopamine hit. It's just everyone knows things are bad, worse than bad. Banks are going bust. I just want to leave me alone with my toaster and my microwave oven and my television set. Everyone knows things are bad. Oh, certainly multiplayer, but you've got certainly multiplayer. You have server costs, which are even broadly applicable if you've got like a peer-to-peer network schema set up. But there's games that are totally single player that are getting delisted from Steam for reasons I can't really understand otherwise than there being some recurring fee. Um, like, why would you remove something that was on there if you weren't being told this is taking up server space and you've got to pay? Um, if that's not the case, then great, but I'd love to know why Steam games get removed other than publisher stuff. Publisher stuff is obvious. That I totally get. Um, insert any third-party title made by Activision ever. Third-party IP released by Activision ever. Ever. Like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games, like Transformers games, like they did something else that I think is gone now. All those are gone, and that's all publisher. The Jerk reference, I was going for the network. Maybe the Jerk also did it. I'm not aware. I haven't seen the Jerk in forever. Steve Martin, right? Yes, Steve Martin. Where he gets shot at by a guy and he's like, oh no, they want to kill the cans. But yeah. Network was what I was gunning for, but I can't remember most of the speech. It's so good. Incidentally, watch the movie Network. That dovetails pretty handily in some of this stuff that I've done. That movie's killer. There are some absolutely phenomenal monologues in that movie. They're so good. But it does affect how your page gets pushed to the front page for new games if you have old ones that are slowly dying. That makes sense, a cookie. Thank you. Only tangentially related to anything. I'm planning on reading and expanding my library of works by, what's his name? John Brunner. Brunner? Because I recently was going through my shelf, and I was like, oh, what haven't I read through in a minute? And I saw The Sheep Look Up and what's it called? Stand on Zanzibar. And I was like, oh, that's right. These existed, and I need to read these aloud. They're so good. Uh, they're pretty grim. They're very bleak. They are wonderful. I still haven't watched Pantheon. No, sorry, a cookie. I will. It is on my list. I've just been like caught up in. I'm meeting a friend who lives out of state in a little while, and I was able to get him to watch Babylon 5. Finally, after many, many years, he's like, "Why? Why didn't I? Why didn't I watch Babylon 5 before now?" And I'm like, "I know, dude. I know." And so he's been rewatching that, and they came out with a animated movie, a 3D animated movie, not so long ago that I haven't watched, and we were going to watch that. So I've been rewatching the series to get caught up. So it's been kind of taking my TV viewing time and dumpstering it. But I definitely want to watch it. It's written down. I have it set. It's going to happen. But anyway, back to John Brunner. He was pretty prolific. I think he died in the 90s. I want to say. I think he died in the 90s. Yes. Yes, he died in the 90s, mid 90s. And I recently had someone else recommend another book of his. What was that called? I think it was Children of the Thunder, which I haven't read yet, but I plan on getting a copy. So definitely check out The Sheep Look Up and Stand on Zanzibar. Stand on Zanzibar and The Sheep Look Up have pretty. They feel like they're sequels to one another. Like they cover a lot of similar territory, but they're fairly distinct in their own way. They're very good, but again, bummers. Kind of in the way that Peter Watts's Starfish or Rifters series is kind of a bummer in terms of here's kind of like the worst things humanity does, but it feels more dystopic even than that in a lot of ways because it feels a lot more relatable. At least to me at the time. I learned later, recently, very recently, that John Brunner was actually his work was actually a inspiration for Peter Watts, and it came as very little surprise. I was like, oh, that doesn't shock me at all. Actually, now that you think about it, when I think about Stand on Zanzibar, yeah, no, that's yep, or the sheep. I get the two confused because I read them back to back. Um, when I think of Stand on Zanzibar, it's like, yeah, no, you definitely were. Um, there's a lot of interesting overlapping themes there in terms of just how people are treating each other, sort of thing. Anyway, with that, I've rambled for roughly a third of the length of this entire video, or no, sixth of the length of this entire video. So anyway, y'all have fun. Hopefully people enjoyed the actual book portion of this, of Hard Reboot by Django Wexler. It's a shorty. It's a novella. It's fun. It's cute. Not super deep, but its heart is in the right place. What I like most about it is that the universe feels lived in. It feels like you could totally make an expanded universe out of it, much like the expanded universe for, say, Star Wars was, where it's like, oh yeah, it's rich. There's all this grit, this scuff, this vibrant, growing biome underpinning everything, and it feels like you could just kind of invent stories in that setting pretty readily. Or I guess like Warhammer 40k. Um, I have my own opinions on that, and it has a lot less to do with Warhammer 40k as a literary universe and a lot more to do with a certain portion of the fan base. Oh, yes, I will get the Discord channel up. I just have been slacking off. I'll get that done. Yes, thank you for reminding me. It'll be super bare bones to start, and then I'll probably try and flesh it out. I'll just have like a couple basic channels. And that's kind of it to start, and then I'll try and flesh it out as people stream in if they do. And we'll go from there. It'll also mean I have to post links as reminders on that. And hopefully I won't mess that up. So I will do that at some point in the near future. I actually planned to do that at the beginning of the year, and then, I don't know, stuff happened. It was busy. I don't have a good excuse. Anyway, I'll see you all later. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other, and until next time, toodaloo!